Well, yes, Hitler, according to eyewitnesses, was drawing maps of offensives in the bunker at night, right up until the end of April 1945. He truly believed in this and sent these plans to his generals at the front through messengers and couriers. All right, but his inner circle could do something about him, about Putin, I mean. And you say they'll just print play money for the population. And for Putin's close circle, who are losing this money, they'll know the real value of that play money. And they're already sick and tired of these sanctions. You keep an eye on the Kremlin's towers. We know very well that there are doves of peace, doves of war, and war crows there. In your opinion, who is winning there today, as of now? And do you see the formation of any kind of coalition, if not of the dissatisfied, then at least of those who are beginning to doubt both Putin's sanity and the necessity of waging this war?
You know, this is a very complicated question, because there are people who realize that Putin is dragging all of them with him to the grave. In the Russian cult of Hitler, each of them claimed their own role, they didn't trust each other, and they were afraid of being betrayed. By the way, let me remind you, few people know this, that, for example, Hitler was informed that Göring had betrayed him, and Hitler gave the order for Göring to be executed. And by the way, in the final days before Hitler's suicide, Göring assumed the powers of Chancellor of the Third Reich. And this, when Göring finally took this step, it was already too late. This should have been done in February 1945. Back then, something could still have been saved. But by the end of April 1945 or the beginning of May 1945, it was already too late. And there are people like that around Putin, but they can't form a coalition. And it seems to me they never will, because each of them is afraid. Afraid of being executed, afraid of losing their money. So here too, your view is a bit too optimistic. I think, unfortunately, you are mistaken, because if you look at the statistics from recent years, it's actually the billionaires who have gotten richer from this war. There are more billionaires now, and they have become wealthier. By the way, what they have isn't just play money. They have real money, because their wealth is backed by the gold and foreign currency reserves of the Russian Federation. So when it comes to their assets, all these so-called play money, it's the ordinary people who end up paying for it. But these billionaires can always get their lost capital back, by the way. Putin can sign over, I don't know, even the entire Krasnodar Krai or Krasnoyarsk Krai or all of Sakha-Yakutia to them, just to say, you lost something. That's exactly what happened when Western sanctions were imposed against them. They were compensated from the Russian state budget for the assets they lost abroad. So in this sense, it's naive to hope that some people have lost money and therefore will be upset with Putin, and that because of this, they'll plot against him. And there are no deep divisions among them. Among them, there are simply more rational hawks and less rational hawks. That is, there are some completely unhinged hawks, like Medvedev, for example, and so on. It's not that they don't understand. On the contrary, they realize that with Trump, they could strike very lucrative deals. Moreover, under Trump, all the sanctions could be lifted from them very quickly. And this is the moment they're afraid of. They're afraid to miss this opportunity. That's the most important thing. They understand that Putin is being stubborn here and is missing a really great, fantastic chance that Trump is already offering him, just like in the 1980s. I have very serious doubts.
Okay, then maybe we could use this desire of certain individuals, I'm sure there are many of them, to have all the sanctions lifted from them. Could intelligence agencies work with them? And secondly, wouldn't it be easier to recruit someone from the very inner circle? I've already admitted in one of my interviews that the boys there, the guards I mean, prepare his food, his tea, and practically even sleep right next to him.
It would be possible to recruit them if there was access to them, but there is absolutely no access.
Do they really live their lives completely without mobile phones?
They can live completely without mobile phones. And if they do have mobile phones, they have monitoring software from the Federal Security Service, the FSB Security Service, installed on them. The FSO and the President's Security Service as well. So, in fact, that's exactly where the problem lies. Physically getting to his person or to the people who have access to him is a very difficult thing.
But you can get to Dimka Medvedev. We all remember very well what terrifying presidential ambitions he had. He probably drank himself into ruin, poor guy, because Putin didn't let him have a second term, didn't let him keep that seat warm. It would be interesting if a coup against Putin were led by Dmitry Medvedev at the request, suggestion, or order of some Western intelligence agencies. That's one possible scenario. Is it possible to bribe some official?
Not Medvedev, no, that's impossible. Because Medvedev is a person who voluntarily handed power over to Putin. If he had even a single brain cell telling him he could keep power for himself, he wouldn't have given it back to Putin in 2012. Medvedev is a different story. That's why, by the way, Putin was only able to hand over power to him, because anyone else would never have given that power back to Putin. No Sergey Ivanov would have returned power to Putin. I'm talking about Sergei Borisovich. But Medvedev did return it. And moreover, even though Putin humiliates him, I still think Medvedev is considered the fifth most important person in the Russian hierarchy. And he's just as wealthy as Putin. So what could you possibly offer Medvedev? How could you buy him off, to put it bluntly? What, are you going to tell him you'll be president instead of Putin? And he'll say, why would I need that? Because that's responsibility. That means you actually have to work. And if you offer him money, he'll say, I have even more than that. You can't offer me as much money as I already have. What, are you going to offer him palaces? He already has those. What could you really offer Medvedev? How could you possibly buy him off? So yes, in theory, you could buy him off with some kind of dissatisfaction with Putin. But for that, Medvedev would have to be his own person. And Medvedev is not his own person.
Okay, so basically you don't see any hope for clan infighting at this point, right? Is that correct?
Let's put it this way. Clan infighting is always present. But in this situation, if we try to predict this kind of clan split, for example, if I were to tell you right now that, say, Kadyrov's clan could eventually raise its 20,000 or 30,000 bayonets and march on Moscow because he simply has them, and he has, let's say, some kind of claim to a federal, for example, a federal role. But the country won't accept him. The country won't accept Kadyrov, meaning even if he reaches the Kremlin and seizes power, the federal elites won't accept him, they hate him, and in that case it would be easier for the Kremlin to just bomb the place along with Kadyrov than to let him have that kind of power. So nothing will come of it here. No one else, not a single other person, has an army. Because Zolotov has a formal guard, but they still have to follow his orders. Where's the guarantee that the National Guard will actually follow Zolotov's orders? Bortnikov has troops. So the FSB, where's the guarantee that they'll follow orders? Shogu, well, not Shogu, but Belokvostikov and Gerasimov have the army. But where's the guarantee that this army will follow orders? That's why this is actually a very complicated matter. So,
if you were in Putin's place, you wouldn't be sleeping soundly these days either, am I right? Does he even have anything to help him sleep?
Putin sleeps very poorly, without a doubt. Yes, because he's a very anxious person. He's a maniac, and he actually understands that anyone within arm's reach of him could snap his neck at any moment. But you can't predict that. So he has hope, they all obey and so on, but at the same time he doesn't trust anyone. And so I'm convinced that at night he locks some kind of armored door with 25 bolts and doesn't let anyone in. And that's what he pins his hopes on. In other words, there's hope that what happened to Stalin will happen to him too. In other words, roughly speaking, he might have, say, a heart attack, and he could be saved if a doctor were called in time, but he's so afraid that he might not be able to reach the button that opens the door from the inside, and from the outside, no one would be able to get to him because the door is locked in such a way that it can't be broken down. That's the only possible scenario. And since Putin is, after all, an old man, an old fart, this is the most realistic way his end could come. So, roughly speaking, he dies there in that locked room, and only on the third day do people start thinking about how to break in. And even breaking in is, generally speaking, difficult. They'd have to blow up half the building just to open that room. And
you could even weld it shut. But that's just in case someone who has access to that locked door happens to see this. You could always improvise like that too.